Well, hello everybody. Welcome to the second session of this series of talks, which I've titled War is Hell, colon, Meditations of an Ex-Marine. I'm Douglas Lummis. I am that above named ex-Marine. Uh, and this is the second in the series. If you haven't seen the first, see if you can find it and watch it before you look at this one. In that first talk, I pointed out that war is hell, which is the slogan or epithet coined by William Tecumseh Sherman, the famous or notorious general in the Northern Army in the Civil War, famous or notorious for burning Atlanta and kicking out all the people who lived there and other horrific acts of war. Uh, he coined the phrase, war is hell. And one of the things I want to ask sort of over and over in this series of talks is, what in the hell did he mean when he said that? Uh, of course, everyone will understand as soon as they hear it that he wants to tell us that war is horrific. War is just as horrible as hell is. Uh, and of course, that's very persuasive. He should know because he did it for years. But it doesn't only mean that. It has a second meaning, which is the one I want to focus on in these talks. It also means that war, like hell, is permitted. It's okay to do it. The one thing that war and hell share, no, they share two things, is what I want to say. The two things that they share, one is they're equally horrific. And number two, each of them is authorized and permitted by the highest possible authority. Hell is permitted by God, according, as I said in the first talk, I don't particularly believe these stories. I think they're very interesting stories that human beings uh, think up. But according to the story, hell is part of God's project, his campaign against sin, his way of punishing sinners. And it's done under his authority. And war is permitted by the state. But there's something called the state's right of legitimate violence, the violence carried out by the state, if it's state business, is permitted. Uh, but there's also a difference. There's one very, very important difference between war and hell in this regard. And that is that uh, in the case of hell, God, who authorized hell, is understood as the highest possible good, goodness itself. And goodness itself cannot bring itself to do the things that God wants to be done in hell and thinks needs to be done, the horrible punishments that are carried out there. And so to solve that problem, uh, God created, according to the story, God created uh, a series of beings, living things that are not suffering under the strictures of good and evil like humans, but are totally evil. Those are the devils, the demons, and the fiends who carry out the punishments of hell. They've got no problem with it because they love it. It's what they do. It's in their nature, and they, uh, as I said last time, giggle and laugh and having a ball. Uh, but in the case of war, we've got no uh, devils or demons volunteering for military service. It's got to be done by regular human beings, people like you and me, except a whole lot younger than me. Generally speaking, the people we send off to war are, uh, if they're a little old, they're in their 20s. But when the ones who join up generally join up right out of high school, or some right out of college, which means they are, uh, many of them, a very large number of them, minors, 18 years old, with parents' permission. 17 years old is also okay, I hear. Uh, so, from my standpoint, they're children, and they're not evil to the core. As babies, they're absolutely innocent. Little by little, living in human society, they grow up and come to have ethical ideas, moral thoughts, and it turns out that most of the graduates of, say, high schools in most countries that have high schools, kids that age, are not evil to the core. They don't get unabashed, innocent pleasure out of seeing other people die. And so they have to be taught in order to do what a soldier is supposed to do, to carry out the duty of a soldier in combat. They need to be trained to do that. And as I slightly mentioned last time, the people who know the most about that, people experienced with it and skillful with it, are the drill instructors. Maybe you've seen some of the war movies that have come out since the Vietnam War that give a nice picture of what the drill instructors do. Uh, they have to educate the young people who come into their uh, boot camp in killing, how to do it, how to bring yourself to do it. So this uh, results in our educational system, a contradiction in our educational system. Our educational system has two parts: educate one side of your brain and educate the other side of your brain. One side, do not kill. That's very important uh, to make sure that children grow up understanding that you don't kill the people that you're really angry at or you don't like, even if you don't like them and even if they're mean to you. Uh, Killing them is a different matter. Don't do it. Without that training, you can't have a society. Uh, that's one side. But then, since many of these young people, especially the young men usually, uh, will be going to war, you have to teach them, yes, in this case, it's okay to kill. You can do it. And in fact, it will be your duty to do it. And don't worry, you won't be uh, punished or criticized for doing it. On the contrary, when you do it and do it well and kill the more the better of the enemy, you will be praised, you will be honored, you will get medals. You'll probably, if you stay in long enough, you'll get a nice retirement. Uh, and it's a completely different teaching from the thou shalt not kill. That's the first thing that you have to teach children. But yet you do have to kill is comes later. And we can see the result of this. This has this dual educational system gives us a kind of double bind, as they call it. It teaches us two contradictory messages, two contradictory principles, and we have to somehow keep them separate so that this one's over here and that one's over there, and you don't worry about uh, how in the hell you can do both, obey both of these principles. Well, in this series of talks, I'm going to worry about that because I do worry about that. And I think it needs some worrying concern. If you don't believe me that this has a deep effect in the consciousness of all of us, and by the way, I mean, even if we don't go to war, if we support a war, if we uh, finance a war, if we allow the state to carry out a war, uh, this also has a deep effect, a powerful effect in our deep consciousness. Now, if you don't believe me, do a little experiment in introspection. Uh, think about how you respond when you read the daily newspaper or watch the television news, assuming you do those things. So you look at the newspaper. Well, who reads newspapers these days? I do, but let's suppose you read in a newspaper that yet another, there's been yet another uh, school massacre. Somebody's got hold of a high-powered automatic rifle and managed to get it into a junior high school or maybe in elementary school and machine gunned a dozen or so children or middle school students and some of their teachers. You read that and what do you think? My guess is that you think, oh my God, what is the matter with this person? What went wrong? What went haywire with this guy? Is he possessed by some kind of evil spirit? Or is he a wildly crazy fanatic? Or is he insane? We got to do something with him. Either put him in an insane asylum or a hospital or a prison and possibly life imprisonment or, depending on where you live, uh, how do they do it these days? The gas chamber, the whatever method is used for uh, execution, the death penalty. We think things like that. Maybe we're against the death penalty and we'll say, okay, life imprisonment. Or if the person is insane, put him in the nut house and see if they can get him cured. But something is wildly wrong with this person. Something's got to be done. And then the next, you turn the page and it tells you that there's been our military has bombed yet another city somewhere in, say, these days it'll be the Middle East, and there have been several dozen casualties, or maybe as many as 100, not unusual. And some of them are, maybe most of them are military, but some of them aren't. What do you think? You may think, oh, that's terrible. Damn it, I wish they wouldn't do that. How sad. Oh, what a bad policy, and so on. But you don't think that the crew of that airplane should all be thrown in the insane asylum uh, or thrown in prison or given court martials and uh, executed, say, or you don't think that. Rather, if you meet one of them, you will say hello and you've had a hard time, I'm sure, and you might invite the person to dinner and possibly even introduce the airplane pilot to your daughter without a second thought. I'm not saying we shouldn't do that. Uh, I have the same reaction. Got, I'm actually a member of the Veterans for Peace, and I know people who have done these acts of war and somehow survived. But the question is, how is it that we manage to think of essentially the same act, that is, driving pieces of pieces of metals, bullets or shrapnel or rockets or whatever, into the bodies of other human beings uh, and causing them to die, ending their lives? How can we think of that act being, in this case, utter horror and despicable, and in this case, Oh, well, just a, what do you call it? A necessary evil. Is that, is there no problem with that? Uh, we do it because we understand the basis of this distinction is what the political scientists call the right of legitimate violence. Sometimes they call it the state's monopoly of legitimate violence. The state at least wants to have a monopoly of legitimate violence and often comes very close to having it. Uh, we know this. We know that that kind of violence is different from the other kind of violence. And we don't call it murder. We call it carrying out your military duty. Now, this is part of our knowledge given us by not only the school system, not only the drill instructors, if we've been through boot camp, not only that, but the society generally. Uh, the way newspaper reports are written, the way we talk about it, the way everybody thinks about it, places this distinction uh, deep in our consciousness. So when we look at the newspaper, we respond this way to one and that way to the other. But this is the kind of knowledge. This is a knowledge that is given to us. The knowledge that again that the state has this right. But uh, please try and look at this knowledge at a little deeper level. Isn't this knowledge, this knowing, at the same time a form of not knowing, failing to know something or forgetting something? So, you see something with this knowledge, but you also fail to see something else because of this knowledge. And this other thing that we fail to see is the fact that from the standpoint of the body, the bullet or the piece of shrapnel doesn't come into our consciousness, it comes into our body, usually somewhere, not the head, very rarely the head, usually somewhere in the midsection or the lower body. From the standpoint of the body, when the piece of metal comes flying through the air, a bullet or a piece of shrapnel, let's say, and it hits the skin, it doesn't stop. It's coming at a terrific speed. It keeps right on going. And it does not change its behavior depending on whether the person who sent that piece of metal is a nice guy or a son of a bitch. It does the same thing in either case. Uh, I hear that from a high-powered rifle, the bullets from a high-powered rifle, when they get inside your body, they start to spin for some reason. They get off center and they spin. So it's like having a super-powered egg beater inside your body working its way through. And when it chops and mushes and smashes whatever it runs into, be that meat, bone, or organism. And when it comes out the other side, I understand that it leaves a far bigger hole than the one by which it entered. And it does that, I repeat, whether the violence is legitimate or not. It's the same event, it's the same effect on the body. But depending on the circumstances outside, sometimes we call it murder, and sometimes we call it doing your duty because the violence is called legitimate. Okay, where does this legitimacy come from? We say the state has the right to legitimate violence. Who says so? Who gives it this right? Where does it uh, come from? If you just say, well, it's because it's the state, because the state has then you're just saying the same thing over again. The state has the right of legitimate violence because the state has the right of legitimate violence. And there are a lot of people that just think that way. That's just how it is, and that's the end of the conversation. But uh, I'm not satisfied with that, and I hope you aren't either. We need to ask where that comes from. Now, if the state is a theocracy, that is, a state believed by its citizens to be established by God and in God's name, then the authority to use violence is given to the state by God. Now, not all gods give that authority, but a whole lot of them do. It's a very important fact to remember about religions that they very commonly authorize violence on the part of their believers. And this brings about one of the most horrific forms that war can ever take, uh, because, well, it's what's called holy war. And in holy war, it's okay. No, actually, it's your duty to kill people not because of what they're doing, but because of what they believe. People who believe in the religion that your God doesn't like should be killed. And if you don't believe that, uh, read the Old Testament. It's full of tales like that. Uh, but let's talk about a secular government, a government that is not founded in the name of one religion. Where does that kind of government get its authority to kill and I should say also destroy property or steal property, or requisition property as they call it, not steal. Uh, where did it get the right to do that? And one of the very best, most interesting, most thoughtful answers to that question was given to us by the English philosopher Thomas Hobbes uh, when he published his great work, Leviathan, in 1651, or smack in the middle of the English Civil War in the 17th century. Uh, the word Leviathan is a biblical word, Old Testament word, used by Yahweh, when he's speaking to Job in the book of Job, he's trying to persuade Job uh, to forget about autonomy and just shut up and respect that is God's power and authority. And he says, consider Leviathan. Uh, Leviathan is a, an invention. It's a fictional uh, being, not a real animal, a whale that God made as a way of showing his absolute power. And Hobbes uses it as an image for what he thinks the state ought to be. The state ought to be like Leviathan, uh, with overwhelming power, power that you cannot oppose and cannot resist. And okay, so why should we create this monster? And his answer is quite simple and very practical. That is, it's the only way, he says, of making peace. Without a sovereign state, sovereign means all powerful, the origin of all power. Uh, if we don't create a sovereign state that has this power, the right of legitimate violence, the right of command, if we don't do that, uh, everywhere will be war. Everybody will be at war with everybody else. Uh, why not? If there's no law and therefore no police and no jails and no forms of punishment and no hangman's gallows or what they used in Thomas Hobbes' days was, of course, the big axe for chopping people's heads off. That's the way they executed people. Uh, Without all that equipment of force and violence held by the state, we'd be everybody would be at war with everybody else. And why? Because there's no reason not to. If there's no law that says that the money in your pocket belongs to you and not to me, if there's no law that says that, then why shouldn't I steal it? There's no one going to arrest me. No one's going to criticize me. It's just how things are. So, in order to get out of this horrible state of war of each against all, as he puts it, uh, we we have to set up a sovereign state with the monopoly of legitimate violence. Uh, without that, without that, he says, the life of man, and this is his most famous sentence that you quite likely heard in school or somewhere, the life of man, solitary, poor, nasty, brutish, and short. That's how it would be. So he's not saying that uh, establishing the state makes the world into a paradise or a utopia or some idyllic place where everybody loves everybody and everybody gets along. He's very realistic. He says, no, no, I admit, he really says this, I admit that life uh, living under a sovereign is very hurtful, is very painful, but it's better than the alternative. As he puts it in his the language of the 17th century, sovereign power is not so hurtful as the want of it. The want of it means, of course, the lack of it, the absence of it. We're better off with it than without it. It's pretty rough living under the sovereign state with police all around and jails and punishment and so on. But it's better than a war of each against all. That's a persuasive argument, and it has, in fact, persuaded something like it does persuade us now. If you ask people, why in the hell do we allow so many police around our cities? Why in the hell do we allow our armies to carry out these horrible wars? The answer would be, yeah, that's pretty rough, but it would be worse without that. It'd be worse without that. The state doesn't create peace altogether. It realistically reduces the amount of violent death and suffering. It reduces the suffering, doesn't abolish it entirely. It's a compromise. That's not a stupid argument. It's rational, uh, but it's also a little tough to swallow. And I want to ask in the following series, I'm about to end this one. I want to ask the question over and over and from different perspectives. Is that really true? Is it really true that the state reduces the number of violent deaths in a society? Or is it the source of the increase in violent deaths? That's one of the things I want to ask. And I'll start taking that up from that point in the next session, and I hope you will join me. That will be number 3. So I can't ask you if you enjoyed this talk. It's not it's not a fun subject, but I hope you found something valuable to think about. Talk to you later.